The lights in the auditorium dimmed as the summit's keynote session commenced. World leaders filed in, the air charged with rivalries too old to mend and ambitions too great to cage. At the far end of the platform, seated with a quiet strength, was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, posture straight, hands folded, gaze scanning the room not with anxiety but with deliberate calm. Next to him, storming in late as always, was Donald J. Trump, flanked by his usual entourage of smug advisors and stiff-backed security. His suit was bold, his expression bolder. He didn't come to listen. He came to dominate. The microphone squealed slightly as Trump approached the podium. The audience, a mosaic of presidents, generals, and CEOs, fell silent. Trump's speech was typical fire and fury, an ode to American supremacy, veiled threats to defiant nations, and backhanded compliments to allies too weak to matter. But then came the line that shifted the temperature in the hall. Let's stop pretending a soldier boy like Traoré can lead nations. The world needs leaders, not rebel mascots. Murmurs surged. Eyes darted to Traoré. He didn't flinch. He didn't smirk. He simply leaned forward. But Trump wasn't done. He gestured toward Traoré, chuckled, and said into the mic, "Let the grown-ups handle leadership. The White House isn't a playground." There it was, the taunt meant to humiliate. But what followed wasn't silence. It was a single whisper from Traoré that began to ripple. "The White House isn't a retirement home either." The phrase shot through the room like a match to dry grass. Some gasped. Others laughed in disbelief. Cameras snapped. The moderators froze. Trump's grin stiffened. Traoré hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't stood. Yet somehow, he now commanded the entire room. What began as an insult aimed to diminish had just become a stage for one of the boldest comebacks of the summit. And Traoré wasn't finished, he was just beginning. The room had heard many things, threats, alliances, declarations. But what it had never heard was a man silence Donald Trump without shouting. Traoré's words, simple and sharp, had sliced through the performative power games like a blade through silk. Trump stood frozen for a second too long, and in politics, a second is an eternity. His practiced smile faltered as he leaned away from the mic, trying to dismiss the moment with a scoff. "Cute line," he muttered, eyes scanning for backup in the crowd. But none came. Not from the Europeans, not from the Gulf princes, not even from the scattered African diplomats who once hesitated to speak. Traoré sat still. No gloating. No applause-seeking smirk. Just that same focused stare, as if daring the former president to say one more word, one more line of disrespect that might shatter what little credibility he had left in the room. A moderator coughed awkwardly. "Shall we proceed to the joint policy dialogue?" "No," Trump snapped, regaining a hint of his usual bravado. "Let's address the elephant in the room. Africa is not ready to lead. Your economies are weak. Your armies, disorganized. And your so-called leaders?" He turned his entire body to face Traoré. Paper tigers hiding behind anti-West slogans. Traoré finally moved. He stood, slowly, not to shout, but to cut. He walked to the nearest mic stand, adjusted it slightly, and spoke into the silence. "You invaded Iraq because you feared a lie. You destroyed Libya to silence one voice. And now you speak of paper tigers? No, Mr. Trump, we are the fire you thought would never reach you." A wave of tension rolled across the room. Even Trump, eyes narrowing, realized what had happened. This was no longer a summit. This was a battlefield. And Traoré had just declared he wasn't playing defense. There was a long, suffocating silence after Traoré's words. Not the kind born from confusion, but from recognition, the kind that meant everyone in the room understood exactly what had just happened. The old world had been challenged, not with bullets or banners, but with truth sharpened like a spear. Trump's jaw tightened. His instinct was to retaliate, to crush dissent with volume, with spectacle. But something held him. Not fear, ego. He couldn't risk looking weaker, so he laughed, loudly. But the laughter echoed oddly in the chamber, alone, hollow, unjoined. "You talk big for a man with no nukes," Trump sneered, eyes flaring with old bravado. "Your country couldn't even make the weapons that scare children in this room. Do you really think anyone here takes you seriously?" Traoré didn't blink. He didn't move. But behind him, the African bloc shifted, ministers from Mali, Guinea, even Congo, leaning forward, whispering, nodding. And just then, one delegate from Senegal tapped his mic and added, "We do." That was the moment it became clear, Traoré wasn't alone. Trump noticed too. "You've got a fan club now?" Trump scoffed. "What's next? A coup at the White House? A Pan-African Navy?" Traoré stepped forward once more. "No," he said evenly. "We don't need to invade anything, because our resistance isn't built on steel, it's built on memory, on blood, on the centuries your empires drained from our soil. Your power is rusting, ours is rising." Then he reached into his suit pocket and held up a simple gold coin. "This," he said, "was once stolen from Africa. Melted, branded with your flags. Now we mint our own. Every ounce is a reminder, we remember. And we are reclaiming everything." That coin, a symbol so small, had more weight in that room than any American flag. Even reporters stopped typing, because in that moment, it was clear. Trump had walked into a war of symbols. And Traoré had already won the first battle. The room trembled, not from noise, but from meaning. What had started as posturing was now a tectonic shift. Traoré didn't need an army. He had just drawn a battlefield around an idea, and Trump had stepped right into it. Trump, ever allergic to feeling outmaneuvered, struck back. "You think your little speeches change anything?" he barked, pacing toward the center of the chamber like a showman reclaiming his stage. "This world runs on might. And we've got it all, the banks, the bombs, the billionaires. You've got slogans and sandals." Laughter erupted from some Western delegates. Nervous, rehearsed. But others, especially younger diplomats and those from the global South, looked away. Shame, or awakening? Traoré didn't flinch. "You think I want your world?" he asked. Trump stopped. "You brag about having billionaires while your people sleep in tents under highways. You talk about bombs while Gaza burns and the Congo bleeds, and yet you say we are weak? You measure power by destruction. I measure it by what survives." His voice didn't rise, it deepened. "Every empire says the same before it collapses, we cannot fall. Rome, Britain. Now you." Trump crossed his arms. "We're still here. For now," Traoré said, "but even the sun sets on gold." The screen behind him flickered to life. Images of American drone strikes. African children digging cobalt with bare hands. Wall Street celebrations as food prices soared in Burkina Faso. The silence became radioactive. "You claim leadership, but your hands are dirty," Traoré continued. "And when the world is burning, we will not ask the arsonist to lead the rescue." Trump stepped back. For once, he had no retort ready. Because Traoré hadn't just exposed a man, he'd indicted an empire. And suddenly, the battle wasn't about nations. It was about truth. Silence lingered like smoke. Then, murmurs. Quiet at first, like wind through dry grass. Then louder. Diplomats leaned toward each other, whispering in disbelief. Not at Traoré's audacity, but at his accuracy. A delegate from Brazil nodded slowly. One from South Africa tapped his pen, gaze sharpened. China's ambassador leaned forward, curious now, not dismissive. The tide had shifted. Trump, sensing it, tried to recover his footing. He laughed, though it rang hollow. "You think one speech changes anything, Traoré? You think the West will roll over because a backwater soldier made a scene at the UN?" Traoré stepped forward, calm as a storm's eye. "I don't need the West to roll over," he said. "I need Africa to stand up." That line hit like thunder. "I'm not here for applause," he continued. "I'm not here to please superpowers. I came for the child working a mine while billionaires fly over him in private jets. I came for the mother washing blood off her doorstep after another strategic strike. I came for a continent taught to kneel." He pointed, not at Trump, but at the ceiling, at the flags of nations that hung like trophies. "And I will not leave until you remember. We are not yours to break, not yours to save. And definitely not yours to silence." Reporters furiously typed. Cameras zoomed in. Millions were already watching, but more importantly, millions were feeling. Trump tried once more. "You talk big for a country that depends on foreign aid," Traoré smiled. "And yet, with all your money, you couldn't buy one moment like this." Gasps. Audible, global. Traoré didn't wait for applause. He turned and walked away from the podium. But the sound that followed wasn't clapping, it was chairs scraping the floor. Delegates standing, one by one, not all, but enough. Enough to mark a beginning. Enough to make a tyrant feel small. As Traoré stepped off the podium, the world felt heavier, and clearer. Trump stood motionless for a moment, his smirk frozen in place, unsure whether to lash out or pretend the speech hadn't happened. But the world had heard. And worse, for Trump, it had shifted. Kristi Noem leaned toward Trump, whispering something sharp. He waved her off, but the damage was done. American dominance wasn't just being questioned, it was being challenged. And not with weapons, but with words that pierced deeper than missiles ever could. Backstage, Traoré was met with silence, not indifference, but reverence. Staffers glanced at him with widened eyes, unsure whether to shake his hand or salute. He merely nodded, unbothered by attention. His mission wasn't glory. It was awakening. Meanwhile, in Africa, the reaction was electric. Social feeds exploded. Millions reposted the clip of Traoré's final line, "With all your money, you couldn't buy one moment like this." Youths in Dakar, Bamako, and Nairobi edited the quote over graffiti walls. Memes popped up. Songs sampled his words. The streets weren't just watching, they were marching. And in Washington, chaos brewed. News anchors scrambled to reframe the moment. Conservative pundits called it a disrespectful rant, while progressive voices labeled it the speech that shook the West. Trump, rattled more than he showed, demanded a second chance to respond publicly. "Schedule another address," he barked. "I won't let some African general rewrite the narrative." But deep down, he knew. Traoré hadn't just stolen the spotlight. He'd stolen the moral high ground. And unlike power, that couldn't be taken back. The morning after Traoré's explosive speech, the world didn't wake up the same. Newspapers from Paris to Pretoria printed his words across their front pages. "The White House isn't a retirement home" had already become a generational slogan. But the true impact wasn't just media frenzy, it was fear and fury brewing behind closed doors. In Washington, the National Security Council convened an emergency meeting. Trump entered with a clenched jaw, surrounded by aides walking on eggshells. The room smelled of desperation masked by cologne and coffee. Everyone knew what they had witnessed the night before wasn't just political theater. It was a paradigm shift, and the old guard didn't know how to fight it. "He humiliated you," whispered a general too old to remember his last battlefield. "The world thinks Africa has teeth now." Trump slammed his fist on the table. "Then we remind them who still runs the show." But the show, it seemed, had changed stages. Traoré hadn't just attacked America's pride, he'd exposed its weakness, the illusion of unshakable superiority. For decades, leaders like Trump banked on African silence. Last night, silence died. In Africa, Traoré's speech was replayed in open-air markets and rural classrooms. Young people memorized his quotes like scripture. In Ouagadougou, students gathered outside the National Assembly, chanting, "We bow to no one." Local politicians who once distanced themselves from Traoré were suddenly scrambling to stand in his shadow. Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv and Riyadh, alliances were being re-evaluated. If Traoré could challenge the United States without a single bullet, what else could he do? Back at his compound, Traoré watched the global reaction unfold. A faint smile tugged at the edge of his lips, not of pride, but clarity. The battle had begun, and it wasn't about borders anymore. It was about truth versus power. And for the first time in a long time, truth was winning. The next move came fast, too fast. Less than 48 hours after Traoré's speech rocked the global stage, Air Force One touched down in Djibouti under cover of night. The U.S. called it a diplomatic visit, but the sudden presence of high-ranking generals, CIA operatives, and defense contractors whispered a different truth: America wasn't planning to talk. It was planning to pressure. From the moment boots hit tarmac, the message was clear: Africa was being reminded of the chain it was expected to wear. At the same time, news broke that IMF loan reviews for Burkina Faso and its allies were being suspended. Western media began flooding with old footage of instability, painting Traoré as a dangerous populist and a risk to regional peace. Every headline echoed the same underlying threat: submit, or be punished. But Traoré didn't flinch. Inside the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, he met with his intelligence council. "Let them come," he said calmly, fingers steepled before him. "We've played their game for too long. Now we write the rules." His advisors nodded, some with worry, others with pride. They knew this wasn't just about one leader. It was about the resurrection of a continent's dignity. That evening, Traoré gave no press conference. Instead, he released a handwritten letter addressed not to Trump, but to the people of the world. It read: "Africa is not a resource. Africa is not a servant. Africa is not yours to punish into obedience. We are not pawns, we are the storm you fear. And if you seek to break us, you will break against us." The letter was published in dozens of languages, reposted millions of times, and translated on protest signs from Lagos to London. Meanwhile, inside the White House, Trump stared at the printed copy of that letter. He didn't speak for a long while. Then, he turned to his aides and said through gritted teeth, "Fine. He wants a war of words. He just declared one." Burkina Faso's capital had never felt heavier. Days after Traoré's open defiance, satellite surveillance picked up unusual movements: U.S. naval vessels inching closer to West African waters, a flurry of drone activity, and private military firms landing in bordering nations. Washington denied it all, but the pattern was familiar. The empire never attacked with declarations, only with shadows. Inside Ouagadougou's war room, the lights were dim. Maps flickered on holographic displays. Every general, every strategist knew what was coming: a test not just of power, but of Traoré's promise. "We don't strike first," Traoré reminded his team. "But we will never be the last to strike." As he spoke, resistance movements across Africa stirred. From Mali to Ghana, youth-led coalitions posted Traoré's letter on city walls and embassy gates. The chant began to echo: "We are the storm." Meanwhile, Trump's administration launched a coordinated media assault. "Traoré is dragging Africa into chaos," shouted headlines. American pundits called for preemptive action. Senate hawks demanded sanctions and even regime change. And then came the leak. A whistleblower from inside the Pentagon released classified documents revealing Operation Iron Vow, a contingency plan to disable Burkina Faso's energy grid, cripple its communications, and seize control of strategic mines under the guise of stabilization. The revelation lit a fire across the world. African nations condemned the plot. Latin America stood in solidarity. Even a few European voices broke ranks, calling the plan a neo-colonial disgrace. But none of that shook Trump. He appeared on live television, finger pointed straight at the camera. "If Traoré thinks he's safe behind those borders, he's wrong. Africa either follows, or falls." The world held its breath. And then, as silence gripped the globe, Traoré responded, not with words, but with action. He declassified a trove of U.S. communications proving decades of covert extraction, assassination plots, and economic manipulation. The truth spilled like gasoline, and the match had been lit. The battle lines were no longer drawn in sand. They were etched into history. Traoré stood beneath a storm-darkened sky, the African sun long swallowed by clouds rolling in from the north, ominous, brooding, as if the earth itself knew what was coming. In front of him, a sea of people. Behind him, a continent watching. Across the ocean, an empire panicking. The declassified documents had gone viral. Secret memos. Economic sabotage. Covert assassinations. Operation Iron Vow. Africa's humiliation spelled out in bold American fonts. CNN scrambled for damage control. The State Department called it unauthorized disinformation. But no denial could unring that bell. The truth had burst into daylight, and it was unforgiving. That morning, Trump held a press conference, sweat glistening under artificial lights. He thinks he's won. This isn't over. We built the world. We can bury it too. But the world wasn't listening to Trump anymore. They were listening to Traoré. Standing at a podium built from melted bullets, gathered from colonial wars, from fallen martyrs, he lifted a single fist. No teleprompter. No cue cards. Just a voice like thunder and a heart forged in the crucible of resistance. For centuries, you robbed us with contracts. You enslaved us with banks. You silenced us with bombs. But today, you listen. The crowd erupted. You told us we were nothing. But we are the gold beneath your skyscrapers, the diamonds in your weapons, the blood in your microchips. You demand we kneel. I say, bury your demands with your empires. As if summoned by his defiance, the power grid lit up behind him, solar arrays glowing, new African satellites beaming across the skies. Sovereignty wasn't a dream anymore. It was infrastructure. Strategy. Will. Then came the final blow. Traoré revealed the Pan-African Defense Pact, signed in secret, ratified by dozens. A new alliance. If one was attacked, all would rise. Military cooperation. Energy unification. A single gold-backed currency, months from launch. Trump's threats crumbled into irrelevance. The stage shifted. From Washington to Ouagadougou. From colonizers to the colonized. The crowd didn't chant Traoré's name. They chanted Africa. And in that chant, one truth rang louder than war drums. The world would never be the same again.